The winter off Canada's Atlantic shore affords little opportunity for carrier training, but the good weather waters that lie ahead on this training cruise will see aircraft in the air almost every day. And at the trip's end, Canada's first aircraft carrier will be a trained and effective unit of the air power essential to a modern fleet.
Hi, I'm Joey Only. Subscribe! Okay, today I'm wearing the Crown and Anchor pub hat because we're talking about boats. In fact, we're talking about aircraft carriers, of which Canada has operated 5 in the course of its history and owned 3. The first one that we owned was the HMCS Warrior, and it was a problematic boat. I mean, you think that we have procurement problems, like it's a new thing for the military. This goes all the way back to 1946, on this day, January 24th, 1946, when the HMCS Warrior was officially commissioned, only to soon find out that it would not survive the cold weather of Canada. Canada's first aircraft carrier was HMS Nabob. Like the coffee, it served in the Canadian Navy from the 7th of September 1943 to the 30th of September 1944. HMS Nabob commenced life in an unauspicious manner. Shortly after workups on the west coast, in January 1944, the ship went aground and had to enter dry dock at Vancouver, where no damage was discovered. Then the ship sailed south to San Diego, went over the Panama Canal, and then joined the home fleet under the direct command of Rear Admiral 1st Cruiser Squadron for the Royal Navy, United Kingdom. Because the enemy was obtaining considerable protection by using Norwegian fjords and channels between the coast and islands, it was decided to mine these areas using the escort carriers HMS Nabob and HMS Trumpeter. Even though the Germans were caught unaware, they put up a serious fight, and several aircraft were lost. 1 Grumman Avenger from HMS Trumpeter, and 4 from the HMS Indefatigable. Operation Offspring was the largest Royal Navy mining operation of the war and considered a success. In addition to the success of the mining operation, a number of Messerschmitt 110s were shot up, barracks destroyed, and 1 small minesweeper sunk. In August 1944, HMS Nabob participated in Operation Goodwood with the home fleet. It was the largest fleet air arm operation. The object was to immobilize the German battleship Tirpitz, anchored in Altenfjord, northern Norway. Tirpitz was to be attacked on a number of occasions. Force 2, consisting of 5 frigates of the Royal Navy's 5th Escort Squadron, the cruiser HMS Kent, and the escort carriers HMS Nabob and HMS Trumpeter, departed Scapa Flow to arrive off northern Norway by 20th August to attack German-held airfields. The main force supporting the operation were the fleet carriers, Indefatigable, Formidable, and Furious. 2 cruisers and 14 destroyers as well. The operation was to be synchronized with the passage of convoy JW-59 from the United Kingdom to northern Russia. First attempts on the 20th of August to launch 14 Avengers armed with mines were thwarted by bad weather, and a second attempt on the 22nd was also cancelled by adverse weather. On the third attempt, the main force launched strike aircraft for attacks on the Tirpitz, but only a few managed to penetrate the bad weather, and only 1 hit with a 500-pound bomb was claimed. Later, HMS Nabob flew a combat air patrol over the main force. While the aircraft carrier was withdrawing westward with Force 2 Gale, she was torpedoed by a German submarine U-354, resulting in a hole 32 square feet located off the engine room and below the waterline. One of HMS Nabob's escorts, the frigate HMS Bickerton, on an anti-submarine sweep was torpedoed as well. Because of her mercantile hull, HMS Nabob's control parties had a difficult task shoring up the ship at the damaged location. Unfortunately, the number of killed and wounded was high. At action stations for most of the day, the supply department personnel outside the spirit room for the daily rum issue were to suffer high casualties, as were the messmen who were also in the area. Boats and Carly floats were launched, and 214 of the ship's company were evacuated. Vital spaces were finally shored up, power restored, and by early evening, HMS Nabob was underway. The story of how the ship's company saved their ship is a saga in itself. 2 Avengers were launched in a submarine contact and managed to keep the submarine submerged for 3.5 hours while Nabob departed the area. On recovery, one of the Avengers caught a barrier and caused damage to 6 aircraft in itself. After jettisoning all the portable heavy gear and several aircraft off the cannon heaving deck, transferring 203 of the ship's company to the destroyer HMCS Algonquin, Dealing with a surface wind of 43 knots, it reached the safe waters of Scapa Flow on 27 August, but it never sailed again. So, cutting our teeth on aircraft carriers, the Royal Canadian Navy got torpedoed by a German submarine, and that was the end of that particular boat. Then comes boat number 2. HMS Puncher was our second aircraft carrier, also owned by the Royal Navy, but operated by Canadians. This was from February 1944 to 16th of January 1946. The HMS Puncher served in the Mediterranean, also joined Tribal Class Canadian Destroyer HMCS Iroquois in the home fleet. She was active, including being part of Operation Newmarket, an impressive force of 5 escort carriers, a cruiser, and 8 destroyers attempting to raid U-boat pens at Narvik, north of the Arctic Circle. After 5 days of appalling weather, the operation was cancelled. And that's about all HMS Puncher really did. And finally, we get to the story of the HMCS Warrior, Canada's first official aircraft carrier that we owned and operated. And it didn't last very long, did it? Here's the story. Within 2 weeks of retiring HMS Puncher, the Royal Canadian Navy acquired a new fleet carrier, HMCS Warrior. She was the first aircraft carrier to be commissioned by the Royal Canadian Navy and operated by Canadians solely. The original plan was the Royal Canadian Navy be allocated 2 light fleet carriers. The torpedoing of HMS Nabob gave impetus to the plan that the Royal Canadian Navy should man the carriers HMS Vengeance and HMS Ocean, or HMS Warrior, in lieu of HMS Puncher for service in the Far East. The Royal Navy had counted on the Royal Canadian Navy to man some 30% of the escort carriers and some repair ships. A formal offer of transfer came from the UK in January, with the Royal Navy providing the aircraft and squadrons, and Canada responsible to pay the squadrons. It was the first of the light fleet carriers to join the Royal Canadian Navy, retaining the RN name Warrior. The ship was a Colossus-class carrier built by Harland and Wolff Limited in Belfast, Northern Ireland. It had a displacement of 13,350 tons and an 18,000-ton full load. Overall length of 682 feet, beam was 82 feet, and a flight deck of 700 feet. The war in Europe and the war in the Far East had come to an end. Thus, the Royal Canadian Navy Air Branch as an entity did not participate in World War II under Royal Canadian Navy Command. Its operations began in 1946. On the 24th of January, it was commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy. Her air complement included Supermarine Seafire fighters and Fairey Firefly FR-1 reconnaissance aircraft. Ashore, HMS Seabourn, the Royal Navy Air Section of the pre-war RCAF Station Dartmouth, was disbanded on 28 January 1946, and 14 Fairey Swordfish were transferred to the Royal Canadian Navy. Formal transfer of HMCS Warrior occurred on the 17th of March 1946. Since HMCS Warrior was not built to operate in Arctic-type weather conditions, her sea trials soon proved that she could not operate in the Canadian North Atlantic. This became obvious when the carrier with 13 Seafires and 4 Fireflies finished her first Canadian Navy sea trials. Despite the limitations, HMCS Warrior came home to Canada for service in the Royal Canadian Navy. With a deck park of 28 aircrafts and 30 tons of aircraft stores on board, she was forced to heave-ho in a transatlantic gale. After the weather moderated, the 2 squadrons embarked and flew ashore. By July 1946, HMCS Warrior was carrying out exercises near Halifax and in the Gulf of St. Lawrence with the tribal-class destroyer HMCS Mi'kmaq acting as plane guard. This was the era before helicopters. When an aircraft crashed at sea, survivors were picked up using seaboat deployed from the plane guard escort. These plane guards were usually destroyers, as they had the speed and maneuverability to be able to keep up with the carrier. By August, HMCS Warrior had lost the first aircraft in a ditching accident, and the plane guard ship immediately rescued the crew. With 2 civilian St. Lawrence River pilots aboard en route to Montreal for a formal visit, the ship's rudder jammed and the vessel went aground at Point St. Antoine. No damage occurred, and on arrival at Montreal, HMCS Warrior became the largest warship to ever enter the port to that time. After further practice flying at Halifax, preparations were made to send HMCS Warrior to Esquimalt, British Columbia, as the ship did not have the necessary alterations and additions to adapt her to operate successfully in the cold weather off the eastern part of the country. She wasn't fit for Canadian weather.
Next stop, Panama, and through the canal to the Pacific, with Esquimalt at the end of this cruise that has sought out training weather in the middle of the Canadian winter for the first unit of the Fleet Air Power of the Royal Canadian Navy.
Encountering a gale while heading south, Warrior proceeded to a location near Bermuda to embark some Royal Navy maintenance personnel. At Colon, Panama, her plane guard, the Travel-class destroyer HMCS Nuka, departed company. The carrier made a cautious transit of the Panama Canal and then met the HMCS Crescent and HMCS Uganda and proceeded to Mexico for fuel. In 1947, she sailed north for Canada into the new port of Esquimalt, British Columbia. While undergoing refit, it was recognized the ambitious plans for the Royal Canadian Navy to commission and man 2 aircraft carriers would be impossible. This was attributable to post-war manning ceilings, which dictated that even if 2 aircraft carriers were commissioned, only one at a time could be manned. As a consequence, a decision was made to put HMCS Warrior, a predominantly warm climate carrier, into the reserve fleet. The decision anticipated returning HMCS Warrior to the Royal Navy, where they would pick up the sister ship HMCS Magnificent in return. Following this decision, HMCS Warrior returned to Halifax via the Panama Canal again with Uganda and destroyer HMCS Crescent. It proved to be a successful trip. Its visit to Cuba was the first Canadian visit since the destroyer HMCS Vancouver in 1929. In November 47, the ship with the 19th Carrier Air Group included 803 and 825 squadrons embarked, sailed for the UK. The purpose of the voyage was to re-equip the Royal Canadian Navy with new aircraft, the Sea Fury and Firefly, and to train her aircrew. HMCS Warrior embarked on the re-equipped squadrons as 883 and 826 squadrons. Ready for sea training in mid-November of 47, the CAG carried out carrier deck landing operations. After a period of 5 weeks in Grassy Bay, Bermuda, cleaning the ship in preparation for decommissioning, the ship was returned to the UK, where on the 28th of 1948 of March, she was returned to the Royal Navy. She was not good enough for Canada. HMCS Warrior was subsequently modernized in 52 and 53, and again in 55 and 56, with a partially angled flight deck and improved arrestor gear. She sailed with the Royal Navy until 1958, when she was sold to the Republic of Argentina and renamed the Independencia. I'm Joey Only, Caribou Weather Dude. I hope you enjoy my channel. I'm adding more history videos in because that's a big thing that I'm really interested in my life. In fact, I probably know more about the war than I do about weather. But you might get some weather here too. So subscribe, hit like, come back around, and have yourself a great day. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye now.